Welcome to Holy Post episode 470. On today's show, a woman sues McDonald's for tempting her to break her fast. Does she have a case? COVID skeptics have some explaining to do because last year life expectancy in the US dropped the most since World War II, and it wasn't because of murder hornets. In some good news, vaccination rates among white evangelicals has jumped 11% since March. We speculate about what the reason might be and wonder what influence pastors are actually having. Then, the United Nations Global Happiness Report is out, and it says the United States has fallen even farther behind. Can we learn anything from the world's happiest countries? And then I talk with pastor and author Mandy Smith about the assumptions we carry about faith in Western culture, and what Jesus really meant when he said we must become like children to enter his kingdom. But first, a quick reminder that you can interact with us about each episode by visiting holypost.com. We love reading your comments, and sometimes we even continue the debates that started on the podcast with you, our faithful listeners. And for those who want to go even deeper down the rabbit hole that is the Holy Post, you can support us through Patreon. You'll get access to bonus interviews, early access to new content like the Jesus and John Wayne series we did with Kristen Dumais, and a live stream every month with me, Phil, and Christian, plus access to exclusive merchandise like t-shirts. But most importantly, you'll be helping us expand the Holy Post to reach even more people. So after you listen to today's show, head over to holypost.com, share your comments about this episode, and hit the Support Us link at the top of the page to learn more about becoming a patron. Okay, here is Holy Post 470.
Hey there, welcome back to the podcast. This is the Holy Post Podcast. I'm Phil Vischer, and I am here with Caitlin Chess. Hi, Caitlin.
Hi, Phil.
You still in Durham?
I haven't left. Nope.
But not Raleigh.
Yeah, I have learned there's some contention between who wants to claim who here, and it's Raleigh that doesn't want to claim Durham. So
Durham wants to claim Raleigh, but Raleigh doesn't want to claim Durham.
I guess, yeah. There's a lot of rivalries in this area. It's intense.
Like sibling rivalry?
Yeah.
Okay. And is that Sky Jatani?
Yeah, I'm here, as always.
Or Psych Jatani?
Mm-mm.
No, okay. And Jason Rugg. Hi, Jason. How are you?
Hey there.
Hey there.
Good, how are you?
Oh, I'm Jim Dandy. And here's the theme song. What's the news that you like the most? Who's your favorite podcast host? If it's breakfast, get your toast. It's Sky and Phil and the Holy Post. Sky and Phil and the Holy Post. And sometimes Caitlin. Woman sues McDonald's after complaining that a cheeseburger advertisement was so irresistible it caused her to break her fast during Lent.
Who took up this lawsuit? What lawyer goes, yeah, you got a case here?
A woman who broke her religious fast reportedly blamed a McDonald's burger ad for the lapse. Ksenia Ovchinnikova said she hadn't eaten meat in a month when the ad made her give in. The Russian, this is a Russian woman, is now suing McDonald's for the staggering sum of $14 as compensation for sustained moral damage.
That's all her moral damage is worth?
Yes. Her sustained moral damage is worth $14. When I saw an advertising banner, I could not help myself. I visited McDonald's and bought a cheeseburger, she reportedly said in her statement. Fox News reported that Ovchinnikova accused the fast food chain of breaking consumer protection law and insulting her religious feelings.
Where is this happening again?
Russia. It's in Russia. She's suing McDonald's for 1,000 rubles, which is $14. Maybe it's more in Russia, than it would be here. But it seems like the legal fees might eat up your winnings pretty rapidly.
Uh-huh.
I have to admit, I know absolutely nothing about Russian legal systems.
Consumer protection. This is the time of year where we don't eat meat, and you advertise the meat. And they ate it.
I really hope this ends up on like a Russian daytime judge show. It's like Judge Vladislav.
You're on the comrade's court. Tell us what happened. Ronald McDonald made me scene by showing me his burger. Okay. I don't think we need to go any further into that story. It's
I
a
do
little
think-
bit
Wait.
disturbing.
What would be the American equivalent? Like what would
That?
an American, well, obviously McDonald's is American, but like could you ever imagine an American Christian suing a corporation for violating their religious moral
Yeah.
positioning or tempting them to?
Yeah, it would. No, it would be like a sexy TV show. We would sue a sexy TV show because I was trying to be pure, until marriage. And you made me stumble by, Netflix. I sued Netflix because I was just trying to watch Friends, and then you put on some really sexy show, and now, I've now ruined my marriage. I will not
Yeah.
be clean on my wedding night. I need $1,200 for sustained moral damage.
It's just so ridiculously frivolous because at what point does a person's own volition and will come into play here? I mean,
you're such an individualist.
no,
She's
but
collectivist.
you know what? I am an individualist when it comes to what I actually ingest. I don't believe in, we don't
Really?
feed each other like
You
mother
think
birds.
You think you eat what you eat only because of your choices. You don't see big agra and big pharma and big Ronald McDonald behind the curtains, pulling levers, shaping everything that goes into your mouth.
Not exactly, but I do think there can become chemical dependencies, like especially certain cycles of blood sugar issues, and you get addicted to the. But that's still I can't blame everyone else for my weaknesses.
Yeah.
Let's put it that way.
There is like a remarkable amount. I read a study recently, or it wasn't a study, it was a report about how there are actual people whose job it is, they get hired by restaurants to design their menus in such a way that you're like psychologically tricked into spending more money, like buying, more expensive things, or like which things they put pictures of and which things they don't. So I'm not saying she has a case, but I am saying we might be discounting the power of suggestion and advertising in our lives.
Well, I wrote a book about consumerism, and I studied a lot of the advertising stuff. Do you remember when, I forget which, was it RJ Reynolds or whatever tobacco company was behind the Camel cigarettes and the way they were targeting teenagers and kids with Joe Camel
with their cartoon character Camel.
Right. But in that case, there's two differences. Number one, it's advertising deliberately targeting children who we define as having less self-control and intelligence than adults, hopefully. And secondly, they are marketing a proven chemically addictive substance. So I think that's a little different.
Burger.
I think if McDonald's were creating advertisements deliberately targeting religious people who were fasting, and if their hamburgers were chemically addictive, I think there'd probably be more of a case.
I didn't say I thought she had a case.
Yeah,
I know, but
I just, I'll give her the $14 if it helps. If it helps her restore her moral integrity.
You know what this story has
before
reminded me
God
of?
And the Russian Orthodox Church. What did it remind you of, Sky?
It's reminded me that I have not used Taco the Bell in a very, very long time on this show. And we have so many different brands that we're identifying, and I think I need to bring them back.
Yeah, what happened? You just forgot?
I think
about Taco?
I think
Did
ever
you
since
silence Taco like you silenced your daughter
yeah, well,
at the end of the last show?
they're both on my phone. I think when we went to remote recording through COVID, I just kind of forgot about Taco because I thought, this is
you
a
were still
temporary
doing
thing
it for a while.
Was I? I don't remember, but I'm going to bring him back. He's coming back.
Yeah, you were for a while.
Yeah.
Okay, bring back Taco the Bell. But don't bring him back during Lent because he makes me think about tacos with meat. And that will cause me extreme moral harm. Sustained and extreme moral harm. Okay. Can we talk about COVID? About COVID. Can we talk about COVID? If any of you, there's still this thing going on where, it's not as big a deal as the experts want us to think it is. And there's still some of that. We now, if you have a relative, okay, I'm going to help you out here. If you have a relative that still thinks COVID isn't that big a deal, it didn't kill that many people, they were just chalking up all sorts of regular deaths and just putting COVID because they were infected, but that didn't kill them. And it's not that, the normal amount of people have died. They just didn't die of other things because they called it all COVID. We now know for sure that that's not true. And you know how we know that for sure, for absolute certain that that's not true?
Well, they probably compared the number of people who died in 2020 to the number of people who died in 2019. Overall.
Yeah, that's kind of accurate.
If there's an increase in 2020, it's probably the result of COVID, not just
every year they calculate average life expectancy. Every year. Life expectancy in the United States dropped the most in more than 7 decades last year, as COVID-19 sent hundreds of thousands of Americans to early deaths. The first year of the pandemic delivered a bigger blow to American life expectancy than any year of the Vietnam War, the AIDS crisis, or the deaths of despair crisis that nudged down life expectancies in the mid-2010s. The first year of the pandemic reduced Americans' life expectancy at birth by 1.5 years to 77.3 years. Okay, so last year, the average American lost 1.5 years off average life expectancy because of COVID. This was the largest annual decline since 1943 at the height of World War II. And the second largest decline since the 1918 influenza pandemic. So the years we've been tracking life expectancy for at least 105 years, and the years where it has dropped the most, the 3 years where it's dropped the most was 1918, influenza pandemic that killed 50 million people worldwide. 1943, height of World War II, when so many young Americans were dying overseas that it lowered life expectancy for a whole generation. And then last year. Okay? So can we all say now, hey, this is a real thing, that it killed a lot of people?
Yeah, but Phil,
Sky,
you have to realize that conspiratorial thinking is impervious to facts.
Well, how can you? What do you just say? They're making it up? They're making it up?
Exactly.
Yeah.
They're just numbers. As Homer Simpson said, we all know that 73% of numbers can be made up to say whatever you want.
Did you say that?
Something like that.
Okay. But now that's the bad news. Here, want to know the good news? White evangelical COVID-19 vaccine acceptance has jumped 11 points since March, a new study. Early in 2021, white evangelicals were the least likely of any demographic to accept the COVID-19 vaccine because, as I saw a meme the other day, why should I be scared of Delta when I've got the Alpha and Omega? And it was a picture of Jesus. You don't have to be scared of Delta when you've got Alpha and Omega, because if there's anything we know from human history, Christians do not get sick.
Right.
If there's anything we know, it's just we're just name it and claim it, plead the blood. We're virus proof. Okay. So early in 2021, white evangelicals were the least likely of any demographic to accept the COVID-19 vaccine. In March, a Pew study found that about 45% of white evangelicals were either probably or definitely not going to get the vaccine, the highest of any religious group surveyed. But it's been an interesting few months, and white evangelicals appear to be coming around on the idea of vaccinations. A June survey from PRRI found that 56% of white evangelicals are now open to getting vaccinated, which is an increase of 11 points. The rise was even higher for Republicans and Fox News viewers. 63% of self-identified Republicans are either vaccinated or plan on getting the vaccine. That's up 18 points since March. And Fox News viewers went from 54% to 64%, 10 points up since March. White evangelicals remain the country's most vaccine hesitant group, though, with 24% refusing to get the vaccine and another 20% saying they're hesitant. Discuss.
Doesn't this just confirm the massive influence that Fox News has? Like they started changing their tune. Most of the people on Fox News, not all, but a lot of
Yeah.
them started changing their tune about vaccines a few weeks or months ago. And you see people following right in line. I mean, I'm grateful that they're changing their tune on vaccines, but it's kind of frightening to think about how many people follow what that one network says as sort of gospel truth. And
Yeah,
it's
but
scary to me.
you'd also have to separate out, what's the impact of Fox News specifically versus, far right Twitter, far right Facebook.
Mhm.
There are other very far right or conspiracy oriented, websites and blogs that spread stuff around. So it's not just Fox News, but it is interesting to notice that that evangelicals moving in a survey matches Republicans moving and matches Fox News viewers moving, which kind of
Mhm.
makes you wonder if giving three different names for those groups is superfluous.
Yeah.
What I think what would have probably made the biggest difference is if Donald Trump had come out and said, "Hey, listen, my
Yes.
supporters, my people, my
Yes.
administration developed the vaccine. I've taken the vaccine. The vaccine works. You should all do it and give me credit for it." If he had said that, don't you
Yeah.
think it could have saved thousands and thousands and thousands of lives? And if he had said it like
Right.
boldly and repeatedly,
if he did a hat that said "Make America Great Again, get vaccinated,"
right? And I mean, give him
we'd
the
all be
credit for it. I don't
vaccinated.
care. Give him
Yeah.
100% of the credit for it.
Yeah. Yeah. Research shows that clergy are among the best candidates for convincing the vaccine hesitant. Well, there's only one clergy on this call. Sky, would you like to convince people? Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm a clergy without a congregation, though.
No, this is your congregation right here, baby.
Mm-mm.
Convince them. Oh, Caitlin didn't like that.
No, I'm
No,
curious.
Phil. No, Phil. No.
Hey, no, but seriously, I would really like to hear from clergy who may be listening to this. Go to holypost.com, comment on this episode. What did you say or not say in your congregations about getting vaccinated?
Mm.
Because I suspect, depending on where you're ministering, for some pastors, that's a really risky thing to do.
Oh yeah.
To get up in front of their churches and say, listen, everybody, you really need to get vaccinated for these various reasons, not only your own protection, but our community and our church and on and on. But in some places, that's a very politically charged statement, and you're going to face the wrath of a lot of people who are being formed by other media outlets and extreme conspiratorial thinking and stuff. So I would love to hear stories of pastors who said it and it worked, pastors who said it and they got a lot of pushback, pastors who haven't said it because they're worried about the blowback. So go to holypost.com, let us know. And I want to praise those who had the guts to say it and hopefully save some lives and help people stay healthy as a result.
Yeah. Even more than clergy, I feel like that tells you that people having conversations with the people in their lives, like that shows you that like someone you personally know who has some sense of like spiritual authority over you could break through some of that messaging that you're getting. Like, yes, Fox News is really powerful. Yes. But part of what I keep seeing with people is that what makes some of that media so powerful is the fear that it's instilling in people. And people don't know how to deal with their feelings. And so they're really scared of COVID. They're scared of how things are changing. They don't like wearing masks. They're freaked out about everything. And so to deal with that feeling that they don't have the language to name and talk about, or they don't have someone to talk about that feeling with, is to just be like, it's just not real. And I'm going to get actually, instead of fear based, instead of admitting that I'm scared, I'm going to get angry about how this isn't real and everyone's overreacting and all of that. And if you can have conversations with people that deal with their feelings that they're not able to talk about, like that's something that a big national leader getting up and saying, get vaccinated can't do, is like be someone in their life that's like, hey, when you talk about masks or when you talk about the vaccine, I hear this fear, or I hear that you're upset about the things you're losing, or I hear, and working through those feelings so that they can get to the point where, because like you said, Sky, people hearing all those statistics and numbers doesn't really change anything, especially when so much of that conspiracy thinking is based in fear or anger or hate, or, so if you have people in your life that are hesitant about getting vaccinated or who are really resistant to truth about COVID or masks or whatever, that's like a space that you might have an ability to speak into that nothing else really in their life could deal with, like what is actually going on with like trauma from their background or fear that they're dealing with or things that they're losing because of COVID. Like no article you send them can really deal with that stuff the way you having a conversation with them could.
Could we embed the vaccine in a cinnamon roll, do you think? Would that be? Because you can get a dog to take any drug if you put it in peanut butter, right? Right. You can get your dog to take anything. What? I'm not calling people dogs. Sky, that's not what I meant. Hey, everybody, that's not what I meant. I'm just saying sometimes a spoonful of sugar helps a slightly unproven vaccine go down.
Okay, Phil, the vaccine is administered through a syringe, which means the only way you're going to hide that is if a bunch of people go in for acupuncture and you just kind of slip one in there.
Yeah. We could do that. We could totally do that.
Word.
Conservative Christians love Eastern medicine.
Right.
They're not at all
totally
suspicious of it. We'll say we're just having a yoga class here. We're doing hot yoga with
Don't
goats,
create
and
this
while you're here,
connection. No.
How about we get a bunch of conservative Christians together for some kind of big like country music worship rally? That's my son. I'm going to silence him now too.
Silence your son. Silence your son.
We get a bunch
music worship rally.
Yeah, and then we train a bunch of nurses and doctors and medical professionals to use blow darts, and you just kind of shoot them with the blow dart while they're worshiping and they're all caught up in the spirit and stuff, and then boom, they're vaccinated.
Yeah,
I was with you for a second there, and then
I was never really with you. You didn't. You never had me on that one. Can we talk about happiness? Is it okay? Is that too much of a downer to talk about happiness? Can I talk about happiness? The UN does a report every year on global happiness. The top 10. Do you want to know the top 10 happiest countries on Earth?
Okay, Finland we know is number 1.
Finland. And see if you see any similarity at the top of the list. Any similarities at the top of the list. Finland, Denmark, Switzerland, Iceland, the Netherlands, Norway, Sweden, Luxembourg. Those are the top 8. Where are they all?
Europe, and mostly Northern Europe. Well, Switzerland Switzerland's in the middle.
Middle Europe.
Yeah.
Middle Europe. Okay. Then the first one outside of Northern Europe, number 9, is New Zealand. Then Austria. Then Australia, Israel, Germany, Canada, Ireland, Costa Rica. We get to the first one. Number 16 is the first country from the Southern Hemisphere.
It's not in the Southern Hemisphere.
Costa Rica in the Southern Hemisphere.
No.
It's not in the Southern. We haven't gotten to the Southern Hemisphere yet.
No.
The United Kingdom, the Czech Republic, and then the United States at number 19. Okay, so what do you see clustered near the top?
So wait a minute. Who's 20? Who's right behind us?
Belgium.
Yes, Belgium. We beat Belgium, man.
We beat them. And after Belgium is France. France is even unhappier than we are. And then Bahrain, and then Malta, and then Taiwan, and then the United Arab Emirates, and then at 26, Saudi Arabia, and it just keeps going. So what do you see at the top? You see small populations with high GDP, high social services, and this is the one that people don't talk about as much, very homogeneous societies.
Yes. Yeah.
That's what I wanted to bring up. For sure.
It's the combination of homogeneity and wealth that seems to bring what we describe as happiness.
So it's a little unfair because you're comparing apples and oranges here, right? Sweden,
Who, me?
It's Sweden or the UN. Sweden, Finland, Denmark, all these other countries, they're small and they're very homogenous. So it'd be like comparing Finland to, say, Maine, which is a largely homogenous state, right? Very little ethnic and racial diversity. There's some in the state of Maine, but not a ton. But when you compare Finland to the United States, a country of 360 million people, that is one of the most diverse racially, ethnically, religiously in the world, it's just got a lot of differences. And so I don't think it's quite fair to compare the two.
What year is this for?
2018 to 2020.
Oh, okay.
It's
I just
it's
Googled
the
it and it said we went up in 2021.
Oh, really?
It said that we're 14 now and we beat Canada,
Yes.
Ooh.
which seems surprising to me.
We just got happier
I
this year.
don't know.
We just got happier this year. How's
That
that
seems hard to believe.
possible?
Right. The article literally says, despite the ongoing pandemic that killed more than 2.6 million people around the globe. It's like, yeah, that doesn't sound good.
What's also interesting is that all of the there are all of the top 10 countries and almost the top 14 countries all have a background of Protestantism. Okay, you're all the way down to Ireland before you get the first historically Catholic country. And so these are also interesting things. Okay, so what impact would that have? What impact would Protestantism have that would lead to, what, and which of these factors would that affect over time? Is it the Protestant work ethic and their countries? So like Italy, Spain, and Ireland versus, Sweden, Denmark, Austria. What's the impact of Protestantism in higher literacy? Is that part of it? Because we see, we did a story years ago where around the world, the countries, you can predict the success of a country long term by the presence of 18th and 19th century non-state sponsored Protestant missionaries. So where you had Protestant missionaries, you have higher literacy because they're teaching people how to read. They're reducing their language to writings, and that starts native publishing houses. So now they have, they can publish things in their own language. They tend to stand up more against colonialism when they're non-state sponsored missionaries, not state-sponsored missionaries. So all of these factors seem to give countries an upper hand in health and low corruption, and in some cases a higher work ethic when they adopted, Reformation Protestantism.
There's another correlation here, Phil, which is the countries you listed at the top. Yeah, they were mostly Protestant and mostly Northern European, but they were also, for the most part, non-imperial countries, meaning they didn't colonize. They didn't try to conquer the world the way England did, or Spain, or even, Germany had a bit of an empire for sure, but it's down the list a bit. But none of those were colonial empires that tried to dominate the world. And as a result, those former colonies didn't come back to repopulate them. You go to England today, and a whole heck of a lot of the people there come from former English colonies, like in South Asia and Africa and other places. Right. So they maintain
so you're
their
saying trying to take over the world might not be worth it?
Yeah, that's part of it. But it also is why many of those countries have remained homogenous.
Right. It is interesting, though, because Japan is also extremely homogenous, and it's way, way down the list. I can't even find. Oh, it's number 56. So way, way down the list on happiness. So homogeneity isn't a magic bullet, but there is very little. What you also don't see near the top of the list are countries that had plantation economies, and so imported forced labor from another country, and now that set up a conflict of a class system, a racial class system, like South Africa or the Caribbean, or North and South America. So yeah, there are some distinct things that seem to have produced happier countries over time, or at least I don't know.
Well,
it's hard to say exactly.
Well, I just looked this up just to give you some reference. In 2020, the total population of Finland was 5.5 million people. That's less than Chicago.
It's the size of Indiana. It's like if Indiana was a country that was almost entirely white, but had very high GDP.
Right. So that's what I mean by apples and oranges. You're comparing, and obviously Finland has a massive land area, so there's lots of space, there's lots of natural resources, and it's only 5.5 million people. compared to 360 some million people, maybe more now in the United States. So it's, yeah, I'm not sure this is a super helpful comparison, but whatever.
Do you know what the unhappiest? Do you know what the unhappiest country on earth is, according to last year's study? Afghanistan.
Well, yeah.
Afghanistan. So sad. Okay, so now I'm going to be Christian Taylor and say, guys, what does this have to do with me? Why do I even care?
I do think there's something to be said with Sky's comment earlier about these homogeneous, groups. It reminded me a little bit of how in the US over the last few years there's been so much talk about, things were so much better in the past and now there's all this conflict and now there's all and it almost is in a certain sense it's kind of like there's like a country within a country of people who were in really homogeneous communities with high GDP and it was very kind of comfortable for them, and because of social media, because of shifting populations, they're confronted with suffering and inequality that they were not aware of before. And so I think there could be something there too to just think about having a better perspective on what have I been shielded from in the past by my community all being the same as me, and that not being an inherent good. That might lead me to like a superficial happiness, but that's
Right,
not
right,
really a broader communal happiness. And it's also not like you being ignorant of something might superficially keep you happy, but that's not the full flourishing of a human to really serve each other.
right.
So it
So,
could be
like,
helpful for us to think about other communities that just look different from us in the United States.
right, because if you think about what would be the happiest communities in the United States, and you're looking at health outcomes, you're looking at
Yeah.
household income, you're looking at there are going to be very small high-end suburbs around major metropolitan areas, and there'll be 5 to 10 around every major
Yeah.
metropolitan area where you say, wow, what a wonderful place to live, what a wonderful place to raise kids, the schools are good, but you realize, okay, so we've achieved happiness, but we've achieved happiness at the expense
Yeah.
of the other. We've achieved the North Shore of Chicago, Winnetka and Glencoe and Kenilworth, these just wonderful little suburbs that, are some of the wealthiest suburbs in the country, exist because Chicago is what it is now, because the wealth was generated in Chicago historically, but then the people that owned the wealth left and built these little leafy enclaves with fantastic schools and left the people they didn't want to be around
Mm-hmm.
behind, which is how you can have, within, as we mentioned before, how you can have within two different neighborhoods just in the city of Chicago, a 14-year difference in life expectancy. So we have, when we try to pursue happiness on these metrics, we can actually make other people less happy
Well,
Yeah.
because we're hoarding resources.
and
Yeah.
that gets to an important kind of macro level point, Phil, which is the difference between the United States and a place like Finland or Norway or Denmark is that the United States has always had an internal tension where we don't genuinely view all of our fellow citizens as part of us, right? Just
Yes.
because you're born here, just
Right.
because you have an American passport or citizenship, we don't really consider you us, because it's always us and them. It's liberal and conservative. It's white and it's black. It's what, throughout the ages we've defined it differently, and so we're in constant competition with our own countrymen and women. We're in constant conflict with ourselves. Whereas you go to Finland or Sweden or Denmark, and it's like, well, we're all Danes here, we're all Finns here, we're all Swedes here, and there's no sense of us versus them because it's just all us. That leads to more cohesion and sense of well-being. Related to that, then, is I think maybe even more important point, which is those other countries share a common cultural stability. There aren't forces coming, this is where the homogeneity comes in, there aren't forces coming in and fundamentally questioning what does it mean to be Swedish or what does it mean to be Danish. Whereas in the United States, because there is no fundamental definition of what it means to be an American, it's always up for grabs. And people freak out when
Right.
different groups immigrate in and change the dynamic or question assumptions. And that's why the Make America Great Again is this nostalgic look back to a time when people idealized the culture. And for some white Americans in particular, there was a sense of, I understood the culture and knew what it meant to be an American in 1960 in a way I'm not sure about
Mm.
anymore. And that's very destabilizing, which creates greater anxiety, which reduces happiness.
Yeah.
Right. So, in a sense, there's a really important role for the church in America because we're the ones who are supposed to create a new community out of disparate elements. We're the ones who are saying there's no Jew, no Gentile, no Greek, no woman, no man, no slave, no free in Christ. So if you can't, because the tendency otherwise that we see, last week, Tucker Carlson's broadcasting from Hungary because he's celebrating Hungary as a model for the United States because they've completely shut down immigration. They've completely closed their border. He controls the press, so bad news doesn't come out about. He's basically celebrating soft authoritarianism
It's
as
fascism.
as a model for America to get things under control, that we're losing our culture. And to say that would appeal to a Christian is sad, terribly sad,
Well,
because what accomplishes that for a Christian is being one in the body of Christ.
okay, not to dismiss the faith component here, Phil, but the fact that that would be celebrated by any American is absurd. Like that
Yeah.
completely
Yeah.
contradicts our Constitution and our founding values. It's just maddening to me that the people who claim to wrap themselves in the Constitution are praising an undemocratic fascist authoritarianism. That it's absolutely
Well,
bizarre to me.
yeah, our friend Rod Dreher is also over in Hungary. They're paying his way to celebrate the Hungarian system. So there's some messy stuff going on. And we just need to remember that our kingdom is not of this world, and we're not looking for ideas about how to control immigration from authoritarian states. We're trying to make a new kind of kingdom, and everyone is included. Everyone is included in the kingdom of God. So let's show people, we should be the happiest. The kingdom of God should be on this list, and it should be number one, the happiest kingdom on earth. And what do we have to do to make that happen? Okay, I think I'm done.
Sounded a little Walt Disney-ish there.
I know it did. Thank you. This is the happiest kingdom on earth. Even the hippos are fake.
No.
Caitlin, help. Caitlin?
This all reminds me of, and I don't remember who wrote this. There's like a famous story that philosophers used to argue about, where it's like a story about this like beautiful city where everyone's happy and no one has to work that much and they have everything they need and they're wealthy and prosperous. But that whole city system is built off of one child living in a small room, experiencing just indescribable suffering for their whole life. And it's
it's that pizza parlor in Washington, D.C.
Right. It's like a thought
Cosmic ping pong.
experiment to be like, are you really truly as like consequentialist as you think that you are? Are you really willing to say all of these people's happiness outweighs the suffering of this one small child? And the people in the city are like ignorant of it. And it's like they learn about it one day, individually, probably they find this child and they have to make this choice of like, do I stay in this city that's so wonderful and amazing, or do I leave? And it's like a lot of Americans in the last few years, that's kind of been for them, is realizing there's this small suffering child that their whole system is built off of. And that's such a horrible fact to deal with, like the reality of racism and poverty and inequality. Like it's so psychologically so much to handle that a lot of people do just kind of go, that's all a conspiracy. Bye. I'm going to ignore this thing I've learned and go on living my really happy life. And sometimes the role of the church, like the prophetic role of the church, is to not let you forget this small suffering child to be. And that's not even just a metaphor. That's like a literal, our immigration policies cause suffering children continuing in a Democratic presidency in cages at the border. And it would be really easy for us to just live our happy lives and ignore the fact that our prosperity has been, like you said, Phil, bought off of those people suffering. And no one else but the church, I think, has quite the same level of like theological reason to call that out all the time, and having the sense of eternity that we have to go, yeah, I can lose everything in this life to bring that suffering child less suffering. I don't have to be so consequentialist in this life right now. I can lose my life telling everyone about this child, and that would be worth it. But we would more often than not in America be happy to just kind of go on living ignorant lives.
Whoa.
Caitlin,
you really brought it home, Caitlin.
That sounds very woke.
It's
Call
no.
it what
It
you
sounds like
want, Sky.
Caitlin is calling us to be the guy with the assault rifle storming the pizza parlor
No,
to
no,
free the
no,
children, to
no.
save the
But
children.
Phil, that is actually a very good picture of how there are literal suffering children in cages, but we would rather make up a
Yeah.
false story where we get to be the hero than admit that there is a larger systemic problem that we are benefiting from.
Man,
Wow.
you just totally rained on my little. I'm going to put on a cape and grab a gun and save
Good,
the
don't do
child.
But Caitlin's point is okay. That's super
Yeah.
important, and
Yeah.
what she's saying is we have a problem in a lot of the American church where we would rather fabricate false problems rather than admit the real ones,
Yeah.
and that's frightening. That's really, really frightening. Or we overemphasize a small challenge like CRT in order to avoid the real challenge, which is many of the blind spots that the church does. Like I talked to somebody recently who was we were talking about how do we respond to people in our churches when they flip out about Black Lives Matter, right? And this friend of mine was saying that somebody came to him and started going off about Black Lives Matter as pro-choice, and they're Marxists, and they're this and they're that, and they support all these terrible things. And he said, okay, let's suppose you're right. What does that have to do with whether or not we're supposed to help our Black brothers and sisters who are facing injustice? And they kind of looked at him like, uh-oh, I've been called out, because it's so much easier to demonize Black Lives Matter rather than actually as an excuse to not have to do anything about racial injustice. But fine, demonize Black Lives Matter, the organization. That doesn't get you off the hook as a Christian from having to deal with the problems that exist in our society around race and injustice. But we conflate that and we make a mountain out of a molehill in one area, so we can just wipe our hands of it and say, I don't have any role in this because, that one little group over there is doing something I don't like.
Yeah.
The wildfires that are burning up California are not because of climate change. They're because of the space lasers that were funded by George Soros. So now I don't have to change my behavior. Okay, it's kind of messy. We as the church should be in touch with reality, right? Am I going out on a limb to say the church should be in touch with reality?
It's like basic first thing.
Is that, yeah? Is this somewhere to start? Even if there isn't a verse that directly says the church should be in touch with reality, thus speaketh the Lord.
Well, yeah, I talked about this in my class at Okoboji. There was this article that talked about people who don't practice self-examination are more likely to be deluded about themselves and susceptible to fake news. So when you have church traditions that never practice self-examination and confession, we shouldn't be surprised that those Christian communities are the ones that are most susceptible to fake news and self-delusion. Yeah. So I think it's a huge blind spot for a lot of American Christianity.
Self-examination as in looking for new moles in the shower?
That's also a good thing to do, although I'm not saying that's something we should practice communally in church.
Good. Glad to hear that.
Yeah. No, what do you mean by self-examination?
I mean
looking for new and suspicious moles.
I mean introspection and ask. I mean, it's the psalmist. Search me, O Lord, and reveal if there be any sinful way within me. Self-examination and admission of fault or sin in our lives, and to do that regularly, both individually in our communion with God and corporately when we gather for worship. And some traditions do this, but most low church white evangelical traditions don't do that.
I can't be sinful or part of a sinful system because I've been washed by the blood and baptized.
Right. Yeah, that's not what Scripture teaches.
Okay.
You could be positionally in Christ and yet still a practicer of sin.
Oh, all right. Theology. You and your seminary. Caitlin, tell me wrong.
Well, you're also right, Phil, that it's helpfully selective when we choose to be like, this is something that implicates me that I have to do, and when it doesn't. We're, of course, going to make a big deal out of the things that I'm not struggling with, that don't affect me, that I don't have any responsibility for. But the things that might implicate me, of course, those are conspiracies that the left is making up. And it's amazing that Christians who believe in total depravity, who believe that you are still fallen once you are redeemed, you still, struggle with sin, that we would be the ones that wouldn't catch on. Like Sky said, how do I check myself to go? And I've even, as I've kind of tried to figure out balance of younger evangelicals shifting away from traditions they grew up in, how even in that shift away might you ignore things that you don't struggle with, right? I don't have any money. So it's really easy for me to talk about wealth and poverty because I don't have, I can try and give away a lot, but I'm not the really wealthy person who would lose a lot if I was just give tons of it away. But for each of us, like, do we have that sense of what things am I going to make a big deal out of because they don't affect me at all and I won't have to sacrifice anything? And what things am I going to be prone to minimize because they might?
Oh, man. Let's all each come up with a list for next week of the things that we minimize because we really don't want to go there.
Like my weight.
Cinnamon rolls. Cinnamon rolls, anyone? I don't know. Anyone? I don't know. Okay. Guys, thanks for listening in. This ran a little long. I assume we have an awesome guest that Sky has already lined up and interviewed, and it's going to rock your world, right?
Certainly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Why not?
Okay. Thanks for your support on Patreon. Thanks for walking this journey with us as we try to figure out how to follow Jesus in a increasingly post-Christian and very messy society, both inside and outside the church. And Caitlin, thanks for being here. We will talk to you again in, let's see, 2 more weeks. Yeah. Then in 3 weeks, we'll talk to you. Okay. Thanks, everybody. See you next time.
I often share with you new things that I'm writing about in With God Daily, the daily devotional I write for people who hate daily devotionals. In September, we'll be starting a new series about circumcision, a topic that most people read about in the Bible but have no idea what to do with. But we're going there. We're going to do 4 weeks on foreskins with some very surprising connections to what it means to be a Christian in a consumer culture. This definitely isn't your grandparents' daily devotional, but it's the kind of deep biblical, theological, and culturally relevant content that I love and I think many other people are hungry for. So now's the perfect time to sign up and get that new series at withgoddaily.com. But there's another reason to become a subscriber that I don't often talk about, and that's the archives. Supporters don't just get the daily email and audio devotional, they also get access to the With God Daily mobile app, with thousands of past devotionals on topics like prayer, idolatry, the cross, the name of God, plus series on the Psalms, Acts, the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus parables. There's even a whole series about Vincent van Gogh and his faith and his art. There's so much content there you could read a devotional every day for years and not run out. And of course, we're adding new content all the time, like the circumcision series. So go to withgoddaily.com to learn more about how you can sign up and become a subscriber today. Our guest today is Mandy Smith. She's the pastor of St. Lucia Uniting Church in Brisbane, Australia. She writes regularly for places like Christianity Today, Missio Alliance, and she's the author of numerous books. Her latest is called Unfettered, Imagining a Childlike Faith Beyond the Baggage of Western Culture. As you'll hear from our conversation, Smith argues that our Western values have us focused on things like power, knowledge, and competency, and we tend to downplay the importance of our bodies, of humility, and of surrendering. In her very personal book, she helps us see why Jesus said we must become like a child to enter the kingdom, and what's the difference between being childlike and being childish. And for Smith, that means seriously questioning the assumptions that the Western Church has held for centuries. It's a really beautifully written book, and I hope some of that comes through in our conversation. Here is my talk with Mandy Smith. Mandy Smith, welcome to the Holy Post.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
I'm assuming this is the first time you and I have met, although it's possible we may have crossed paths before.
No, I think so. I hate that feeling that you've possibly met somebody before and you don't remember it and they do, but no, I don't think we have. It's mutual.
And for those who don't know you, yes, that is an Australian accent that they're hearing.
Yes, it is.
You are coming to us from Brisbane, is that right?
Mm-hmm. That's right, and you said it correctly as well. Yeah.
I spent some time there actually. When I was
Oh,
in high
very
school,
nice.
I did it's a long story, but I spent a week living above a bar in Brisbane as a high school student and
Wow.
attending a high school there for as a student
Huh.
exchange program thing. It was a
That's
fascinating
great.
place. I still remember the Bundaberg rum not too far from
Oh
there
my
and
goodness. Yes, lots of
yeah,
high school
so
memories coming up with that name.
anyway, we're not here to talk about tourism in Australia. We're talking about your new book, Unfettered, Imagining a Childlike Faith Beyond the Baggage of Western Culture. Um, this is an unusual book and a beautiful book. And the unusualness comes from the fact that you're trying to dismantle something a lot of us just take for granted.
Mm,
The very first line of the first chapter is Western culture is in a tailspin and Christian faith is entangled with it.
mm.
All right, we've joked on our show a lot over the years about the end of Western civilization. What do you mean by Western culture is in a tailspin? And
Yeah,
how are we as the church entangled with it?
right. Well, all of our ways of doing things are showing themselves to be really flawed or lacking in integrity. And that's why so much is in crisis at the moment around us. You know, our headlines are constantly filled with that. And things like a pandemic just only bring that even more to the surface. And so we're talking about human efforts to control things fundamentally. I think that's a big part of our industrial revolution kind of history, of our I think, therefore, I am kind of history. And so there are some good things, of course, that Western civilization has done for the world. But at the same time, when we are trying to build everything on our own human capacity, we're going to eventually, that's going to show itself to be very lacking. I think we're coming to that realization at the moment, even when you think about what we're doing to the planet, you know, and so it's not sustainable in any way, not just environmentally, but relationally and spiritually and in all the ways. So, you know, it's as soon as Christianity began to be the official religion of any worldly empire, then of course it's going to be wrapped up in empire ways, as Walter Brueggemann uses those phrases. And so we like the idea. When I first moved to America, I was really impressed that Christians had radio stations and bookstores and political sway and economic power. And I was like, wow, we can do stuff here because there's lots of us and we have power. But over time, it really revealed itself to be really troubling because once you enmesh in those power structures, that you sell out as well. So that's a simple way of summing up, I guess.
Yeah, in the early pages of the book, you unpack those two false ways of engaging faith, which is the Cartesian way of I think, therefore I am, and then sort of the activist way, which is I do, therefore I am.
Mm-hmm.
That caught my attention because I've taught many times in different settings that we tend to go to a false gospel of information or a false gospel of activism because we
Oh,
just
wow.
don't know how to do anything else. But you link those
Mm-hmm.
specifically to the Western biases of seeking control. You're not alone in pointing out the shortcomings of a lot of the way we've thought about our faith recently. There's tons of people writing and talking about deconstructing these assumptions.
Mm-hmm.
What stood out to me about your book was the antidote that you prescribe, which
Mm-hmm.
is uh, it caught me by surprise. I mean, it's in the subtitle of the book. It shouldn't be that surprising, but it's not what you typically hear. So
Mm.
talk about what is it about childlike faith that you believe is the antidote to the intellectual pursuit or the activism pursuits that are so common in Western Christianity?
Right. Because it's interesting, really, as when I talk to people about this and I say, we're stuck in, I think, therefore I am, and I do, therefore I am. The natural instinct is, oh, you're right. We need to think about this so we can fix it. Like it's in us. You know, we can't just talk
Hmm.
about this as being something outside of ourselves. And so something has to be detoxed in us. We also are shaped by the Western culture. And we need to even change our postures and our expectations and habits. So, this was something that came to me by accident. Like I wasn't really looking for this. It was an invitation towards childlikeness that came in a sabbatical that I then had to kind of release into. And it became so oh my goodness, transformative, so healing, that I had to then figure out what on earth this was, and started to notice how so much of my baggage related to power dynamics in the church were being healed in me. And so ironically, I actually wrote this book 4 different times because the first book was a very logical argument for childlikeness. And so you can see that's inherently lacking in integrity. And so I had to go back and take the huge risk. It felt very risky for me to speak into a current crisis in the church, to speak to very well-informed, thinking people and tell them childlikeness is the answer. But then I had to wonder if that's what Jesus faced when he said, this important thing that you really want to enter into the kingdom, you have to become like a child in order to do it. And we've not spent much time exploring that. I found one serious theological work on childlikeness, even though Jesus says this is the way to the kingdom. Because I think we hear that and we think, oh, well, that's just ridiculous, Jesus. There has to be a better way than that. That just seems like silliness. But I think it forces or requires us to be transformed in order to receive it. And we're not talking about childishness. I think we have some hesitation there.
Yeah, so that brings us to, we can't help but use words and logic a little bit in our conversation on this.
Which isn't a bad thing.
Right. We're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater here, but
yes,
you need to define your terms a little bit. So what do you mean, and what do you believe Jesus meant when he said we must become like children? What qualities of a child is he really saying are critical to enter the kingdom?
Yes. I think that's such a good question, because we often just assume it's whimsy and wonder, and then we think, well, I have to pay the bills. So on vacation, I might take some time for whimsy and wonder, but the rest of the time, yeah, no thanks. So I think fundamentally it's a posture of openness and a posture of releasing of control, of being unafraid of our limitations, which is really a posture of being comfortable with our humanness. And it's really encouraging to me to remember that we've done this before. We have experience in not being the ones running the universe and being okay with that. And we can do it again. Even though we do have adult responsibilities now, there still is a way to move towards that. And so a big part of it for me is a kind of an emptying of my efforts at human control. And that's a daily practice. It's not a comfortable thing for grown-ups.
So yeah, you do talk quite a bit in the book about power and control and the Western bias that the way you develop and grow is by gaining control, by gaining power, by gaining knowledge, all things that small children don't possess and seem relatively okay not possessing them. But the other aspect that caught me by not surprise again, but was deeply refreshing about your book is the Western way of thinking tends to break everything down into its constituent parts. And you argue that what we need is a holistic approach to our faith that a lot of Eastern cultures had, certainly early Judaism had, and that children had. Let me read something again, relatively early in your book on page 24. You say, when Jesus says we should love God with all our heart and soul and mind and strength, which is in Mark 12 and Luke 10, he's not creating a taxonomy, but describing a kind of engagement that involves our whole selves. How does that relate to your understanding of being a child?
Yeah, I think we trusted our whole selves when we were children. We listened to our thoughts and ideas, and we also listened to our bodily experience, our senses. We listened to our instincts. We listened to our emotions without shame. I think this is one thing that looking into Western culture revealed to me, that a lot of critics have talked about the damage we've done to the human being by compartmentalizing all those pieces of ourselves. And I was really, really blessed to watch how in a passage like the road to Emmaus, Jesus is walking to them and having a very rational conversation with them all day long, and they don't get it. And then when they have this embodied experience of eating together, this sensory experience and this social experience of eating together, then they get him and they verify it by saying, weren't our hearts burning within us as we walked on the road with him? And so I love the fact that they trust that. That's a way that they actually say it must be true because we felt something. And we would say, well, if I felt something, that means it can't be true. And so this is not about feelings versus thinking. This is about partial engagement versus whole person engagement. And there's some serious baggage related to that has made me worry, if I listen to this little prompt that could be just, gas from lunch. I don't know, or it's the Holy Spirit. Which one is it? I don't know. Is there some way that we are supposed to, how do we trust those things that come from the Spirit? Because they often don't make sense to us. And it's not until we say yes to them and move towards them that we actually discover what they could be. And that's really risky. So a lot of this was surprisingly scary.
That brings us to a topic that you address later in the book around humility and its link to honesty. And I was so gratified to see you bring up Jesus' prayer in Gethsemane, because, as you put it, in that simple prayer where he expresses to the Father his true desire, which is not at that moment to go to the cross, and yet he surrenders himself, trusts himself completely to the Father. He leaves room. Why am I saying this? I should read you. You say there is space in this prayer for God to be God and humans to be human. Jesus is honest about his gut, what he's feeling, but he also completely surrenders and trusts. And it seems to me like a lot of us in the Western church suppress those true desires. I think we would all admit some of our desires are probably self-destructive and not good, and so they need to be controlled. But we suppress them to the point where we won't even admit that they're there. We won't even be honest with God that they're really there, let alone surrender them to him and trust him with it. So how have you grown in that capacity, and how have you helped others grow in that capacity to not turn off the rational part, but welcome the emotive part alongside it?
Right. And it is genuinely scary. I get it, because we have been told that's not worth trusting. And I think that it comes to step towards it and to take those risks comes from a fundamental choice to believe that we are one, that I am one within myself, that my feelings and my bodily experience and my instincts and my mental capacities or thoughts or ideas are all somehow whole, connected to each other. They're not always correct, they're always limited, but at the same time, I am a whole being, and these pieces of me are all welcome. And at the same time, this whole being that I am is connected to creation and other people made in God's image, and connected to the God who is one. And there is truth to be found in all of that. That God's truth is the entire creation is steeped in God's truth, and that comes to us through spoken language and rational thought, but it also comes to us through creation, through nature, through beauty, through art, through emotion, through our bodily instincts and urges. And I think, there's something medieval about this fear of those different parts of ourselves. Of course, we can listen to the wrong things and pursue the wrong things, or value them in the wrong way. But what if I had to do this just yesterday? Like, this is an ongoing thing for me too. Like, there was something that really needed my attention yesterday, and I was afraid to feel the feelings. And I finally just felt this moment where the Lord was like, for goodness sakes, Mandy, will you just let yourself cry? Just sit on the floor and curl in a ball and just let it out. It's really scary to lose control in that way. But there was real truth hidden in those tears. Like, something significant broke through when I let myself go there. And I felt so much better afterwards, which in some ways is the gospel story I feel like we're often just doggy paddling furiously at the top of a waterfall, trying to just hold on to control, whether personally or as a congregation or as a Christian movement. And it lacks imagination for the three-part story of the gospel, which is life, death, resurrection, not just life and death. And we sit on, we doggy paddle furiously on this side of suffering or turmoil or whatever crisis, um, and we miss the opportunity to see how there is something on the other side of the crisis. And whether it's this existential, like I have to think through things, or the emotional stuff, or the relational stuff, or whatever it is, as Richard Rohr puts it, it's transformation always goes order, disorder, reorder. And we don't always want to go into the disorder. And I think that's a cultural thing too, of like, we want to look in control. We want to feel in control. We want to seem like we've got this all together. And I think when we were kids, we somehow had capacity for that scary place of just being honest about what is and trusting that we wouldn't stay there forever.
Okay, I can imagine somebody listening to you and thinking, okay, yeah, maybe some of our traditions have overemphasized the rational, overemphasized the intellectual control. We know there are certain church traditions that come out of Enlightenment European, especially Northern European ideas that are heavily emphasize the life of the mind. I think of Reformed theologies, Presbyterian theologies, and they might assume that what you're saying is we need to be more Pentecostal. We need to be more experiential. We need to be more emotional. I know that's not what you're saying because I've read most of your book, but what's the error in that side of it where we overreact to the rationality of Western culture and go to this
Right.
hyper emotive, non-rational experience of
Right,
the
which
faith?
can be an anti-intellectual.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah, I think neither is helpful because both of them are partial engagement. And I love, I have a favorite epistemologist. I don't know if that's a normal thing, but I mention her in the book, Esther Light Cap Meek. And when I read her books, I just was like, yes, this is what I've been waiting for, because she talks about loving in order to know. And she says our usual approach, which is knowledge as information, says if I just gather enough data, I will know this thing. But what we're invited into by God and in general in the world is to take the risk of loving something in order to know it. And that's whether we are engaging in starting to learn a new subject in university or starting a new relationship or any kind of what she calls learning venture. There is this risk that we take of engaging with it first in order to know it, engaging with it with our whole selves. And that's where real knowing, real experience comes from. And that is just as true also for our faith walk as well, that I think there's actually a fear that if we put our whole selves in, we may be disappointed, or God may not show up in the way that we had expected, and that will make us feel rejected or far from God. And sometimes there is silence, and God is in that too. Sometimes it doesn't work the way that we expected, and that's a part of it, is releasing our agenda even. But I think it's good to acknowledge it is kind of scary, and it's easier just to study something from a distance. But yeah, I do believe that there is a whole person engagement that God has stepped into himself. He has made himself vulnerable to meet us in that way. And I think he's bombarding us constantly with messages. We often say he's silent because we're only looking for a very limited communication from him, which usually is in human language, a rational sentence, a word, or a sermon. And those things are wonderful things, but I think that he's made us such complex creatures who can take in information in many ways, so that when part of us gets tired, then there are other parts of us that are open to receiving from him. And this is what troubles me sometimes about the deconstruction process that people are going through. And it breaks my heart because I've gone through it too, and I understand. And I think it's actually really helpful and healthy, because they are kind of releasing into that waterfall experience where the disorder is everywhere. But what frustrates me sometimes is that we continue in with the partial engagement, that it's often a rational thing. When I think most people, myself included, who have to go through that process, it's a very emotional process. It's a healing of shame and healing of woundedness and all kinds of abuse in the church. And if we only try to figure it out with our logic, then we're never going to really discover God at the other side.
Yeah, as somebody who probably leans just naturally toward the more cerebral, intellectual side of stuff, and then the culture pushing you even more, there have been breakthrough moments for me in my own development where the rational just fell completely apart. And there's something bodily, there's something emotional that happens. I've told many people this, but when I don't deal with things well, I end up getting heart palpitations. It's sort of my
Mm,
body's way of saying you're denying what's going on, you're denying the
mm,
stress. And thankfully there's nothing that's been looked at. There's nothing terribly dangerous about my heart palpitations, although they scared me to death when they first emerged when I was in my 20s. But now I kind of see it as a bit of God's grace to me. It's a
mm,
reminder that I am an embodied creature with
mhm,
emotions and more than just an intellect. And I need to pay attention to those things and meet him with all those things and engage with life with all those things. And when I fail to, my body has a natural way of waking me up to it. But going back to the swings we make from the hyper rational to the hyper emotive, we know the ways in which we try to use logic and reason and information to control the world. I've been connected to, sometimes tangentially, some Pentecostal communities and traditions which try to use the emotive to be very controlling, and
mhm.
even using spiritual gifts and other ways of engaging God in an almost incantational, magical way that if you just
Yeah.
do X, Y, and Z, you'll get the outcome you want.
Mhm,
And you speak beautifully in the book about opening yourself up to God, but allowing him to be in control. And you tell the
mm.
story, I'd love for you to retell it if you don't mind a little bit here, of a moment where you ventured out and trusting God that it involved dancing and healing. And
Mm,
I think it was one of the stories in the book that stood out to me as capturing what you're trying to communicate in a
mm,
narrative form. So would you mind
mm.
just recalling some of that for our listeners and
Yeah.
teasing out the pieces you think are important for them to know?
Yeah, it had several levels, so stop me if I go too far in it, but I sensed this prompt to pray for healing for somebody in the congregation, and that's not something I've ever done before, and I knew of the abuses of it, and I was worried I would look foolish, and I was worried people would be disappointed. And so out of obedience, I was like, okay, we're going to do a thing where we pray for somebody to be healed, and I was also trying to avoid some of that baggage related to triumphalism with all of that. And the night before, I felt prompted. This strange sentence popped into my head: "Pray, dance for the healing to come." And and I was trying to I had promised God, I'm just going to say yes to these prompts. I have no idea what they mean. I'm just going to be obedient and trust that you have something for me in them. So the night before this healing prayer service that we were hosting, which I was terrified about, um, I went to the church by myself late at night and just went into the sanctuary where we were going to have the service. And um, I didn't even bring music with me. So I was thankful because there was music playing in the cafe next door. And I, even now as I'm visualizing it, I imagine that Elaine dance from Seinfeld, if you've ever seen.
Yeah.
Like that's about how graceful I was. I was so uncomfortable and so self-aware, but I was by myself. Like, why is there so much hesitation in me to just move? And there's a lot of junk there related to body image and women's stuff um, and leadership stuff, like trying to look professional and make sure people take me seriously and all that stuff. But I was by myself, for heaven's sakes. And um, and as I was dancing out of obedience, like it wasn't a dance of joy, it wasn't exuberance. It was just like, you told me to dance for the healing to come, and so I'm just going to do it. And something released in me that I think has always stayed released or opened up, like something cracked open in me that was just this sense of control, and a little bit of light kind of just entered into my imagination for the first time in a long time. And it wasn't like everything was suddenly clear, but some possibilities became open to me that hadn't been open until then. And I started, I think, to realize like maybe there's something in this whole bodied thing. And so the interesting thing for me with that was I thought that dance for the healing to come just meant so in the beginning it was, if you really believe this person you love was going to be physically cured, wouldn't you celebrate that? And it's an act of faith to celebrate it before it happens because you trust that it could happen. But that's a really scary place to put yourself in, to say like Jesus did in Gethsemane, I don't know what you will do, but I know what you can do. And I'm going to celebrate now as if I trust that it's really that it's really possible, without forcing God to do it, to say, I believe it's possible. And so something about the release of the dance physically was also, I think, what I needed to do spiritually and emotionally, is just release into God and say, I know you could do this. I'm going to put myself out there to ask you to do it. And as Jesus says in Gethsemane, not my will, but yours be done. And interestingly, you'll have to read the book, I guess, to read the other layers of it. But the more I danced, and again, usually privately, like I'm an introvert, and I still do this in the mornings when I'm really frustrated, when I really need to empty of my own desire for control. I get up and I make myself dance, and something does break in me each time, and I release each time. And I actually have a playlist on Spotify. If anybody wants it, maybe I'll give you the link to that. At the beginning, I thought it was dance as if you trust that healing will come in somebody else's body. And the more that I did it and the more layers it took on, the more it became dance so that the healing will come in you. The dancing itself is helping you to release from your own control and your own stuck in your own headness. But actually, the more I danced, the more I was dancing for the healing to come to the church as well. And there were times when I saw images of our beautiful ecclesia dancing with freedom, that she's been bound up. She's been enslaved. It really breaks my heart when we talk about the church as if it's something separate from us. And I've even heard people say, the church is a whore, which feels to me like what somebody calls a woman after he has after he has abused her in that way, and it's denying our own part in the way that we have made the church into an institution, into a factory, into all the things that she isn't. She is a beautiful bride of Christ, and her body has been abused, and we have done that to her. And so part of what has come to me in the dancing is this image, as I'm finding my own image of my own body being healed, as I'm moving in a way that I actually feel really uncomfortable moving because of my own gender-related and body-related baggage. I'm wondering what it would look like for the bride of Christ's body to be healed. And for her, I just had this image. I'll say this and then I'll finish. It's a long answer. I have this image of a woman who has been chained and enslaved, who has not forgotten her beloved, who has longed every day as she's been enforced in this slavery. And the second she gets a chance to be set free, she runs for him. And I just have this image of her running barefoot with her skirts flying back to her beloved. And we have some part in that. As we individually are released and find healing and come back to our beloved, we are the church, and we are part of that bride being whole again. So that imagination also was a part of what God was healing in me, and I still dance and pray for us all to be healed.
Wow. One of the things that comes to mind is as I've traveled a lot, as I've encountered different religious traditions around the world, it's striking how almost all of them incorporate a significant physicality in their faith. Even if it's Muslims praying individually or collectively, it's very physical, right? There are certain postures that they take, or dancing in various religious traditions, even different forms of Christianity. But in so much of the Western American evangelical white church that many of our audience are probably familiar with, we really do gather as if we are just disembodied brains, which
Mm.
partly is why we are able to disincarnate church and make it an experience you watch on a screen, because we don't think our bodies
Mm.
matter. And yet the story you just told
Mhm.
of your whole self, your body, mind, soul, all of it, engaging with God and taking from that, learning from that, discovering something from that, which is truly experiential, which even in your stumbling to articulate it is a evidence that this is not just a cognitive experience you had. It's not just an idea
Mm.
you grasped. It was something that transcends words. And
Mhm.
you see that throughout the scriptures as well. So anyway, I thank you for sharing that. And I do encourage people to go and read that element of the book and the way it tracks throughout and works as a metaphor for what you're trying to describe of childlike faith. In the minutes we have left, though, I want to talk about what I anticipate some people listening may have as an objection.
Mhm.
And that is, throughout the scriptures, particularly in the New Testament, we read over and over and over again this call to maturity, this call to
Mm.
put childish ways behind us, as Paul says,
Mhm.
this call to grow in our faith and maturity in Christ. Even Jesus at times chastises his disciples for being slow in their
Mm.
understanding. Do you
Mhm.
have eyes and yet still not see? He says to them. So how does that call to maturity fit with Christ's call to be childlike
Yeah,
in
I'm really
entering the
glad you asked
kingdom?
that.
How do those
Yeah.
reconcile?
So I had to create some language for this because we have the concern about that. So we have childish versus childlike, but we don't have a similar caution about being adultish or adult-like. There are good ways to be like adults, and there are unhealthy ways to be like adults. And so the way I tell this story, I had to set aside adultishness to embrace healthy childlikeness. Adultishness is that effort to always be in control, and so to embrace a fearlessness about our limitation and our powerlessness. I had to set aside that adultish desire, which is really scary. But the interesting thing is that when you when you rest in the Spirit, when you set aside that power, I believe you always receive something. It may not be what you expected, it may not be what you want, but there is always something available to you when you set aside your own power and you're just available to the Spirit. And then there's an invitation to respond. And this is what I love about the Spirit, that we're often concerned about being consumers, but once we get filled up, that Spirit does not want to sit still and just wants to pour out of us and do things in the world. It can't, like, we can't keep it to ourselves. By its very nature, it's an active, loving, giving, serving, sacrificing Spirit. And so then something more significant, or something just as significant, happens where we're invited then into our adult likeness, where we have to set aside our childishness. We have to set aside that, oh, I'm only small and I have nothing to say and I have nothing to do. And we see this with all of the prophets throughout scripture who say, who am I? I've got nothing, don't ask me to do things. When Jeremiah says, I'm just a child, I can't do all these things you're asking me to do. God doesn't say, oh no, don't worry, you can do it. God's like, I am the Lord and I am calling you and I will send you and I will give you the words to speak. And so I think you're right that a big part of it is also embracing our authority. And there's that has baggage around it too. I know that we have to even understand what Christ-like authority looks like, because he did have authority. And so I would say a big part of spiritual maturity is both childlikeness of being unafraid to be powerless, and adult-likeness of being unafraid to be somewhat powerful as well. We have been given agency. We have been given voices. And one of the things that makes me sad at the moment in our deconstruction of power abuse, which is really healthy, is that we then go to a place of saying, so we have no leadership. Nobody has any
Right.
authority anymore. And that's not scriptural. Jesus had authority. Jesus called leaders. The question is whether it's a Christ-like authority or not.
A word that popped up quite a bit in your book was paradox. And I think what you're articulating here is exactly that paradox where, for
Mm,
example, the Lord says to Paul, my strength is made perfect in your weakness.
mm,
And Paul reiterates that idea in a number of his letters, even where he talks about spiritual maturity in Galatians 5, for example. He's talking about dependency upon the Spirit. And yet
mm,
that grows us into maturity and bears good fruit. So there is this emptying and this humility, this dependency, and yet in that dependency we see great power and authority comes out of that. So yeah, we don't really have the natural categories for all of this in our
mm,
culture and in our
mhm,
language, like you point out, and certainly in the way we've modeled ministry and church leadership. So for all those reasons, your book was beautiful and refreshing and challenging. And for those who aren't familiar with your writing and haven't looked at this book yet, it's not one of those books you pick up and there's just a list of here's what you do and here's what you don't do.
mm.
It's beautifully written. It's, I think, the only book I've encountered that has its own playlist. You have recommended music for each
Yep.
chapter of the book, which is
Yeah.
fantastic. All that, that full-bodied experience. You're not just reading words on a page, but you're encouraging us to go
Yeah.
beyond
Well,
that.
I felt the irony as I was writing, and I think I'm just always longing for integrity and for the way we claim to do things to be the way we actually do things. And so I realized the limitation of having a book that's talking about the limitation of thinking, because really I'm inviting you
Right.
to sit and just listen, to sit and just read the whole time. So I tried to create opportunities for people to engage, and the people who actually, of all the things I've ever written, this is the one that I'm hearing most from people, that it's been deeply transformative. But I'm only hearing that from the people who really actually engage with I have like a field guide kind of experiments throughout, that people are saying like, oh my goodness, I'm having to take this really slowly and one thing at a time, because there are ways that I'm learning from each of these experiments along the way.
Yeah, the book ultimately feels to me like an invitation. It's
Mm,
glimpses of what's possible, and then you invite people into that in these various ways, and these field guides that you give them. So it's a little different for people who are used to just reading a book intellectually and getting the ideas and regurgitating them. I encourage you to pick this up and read it slowly and engage it, not just thoughtfully, but experientially. Mandy
mm.
Smith, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for writing this book and sharing vulnerably about your own growth and experience, which is, I suppose, what we're all called to in church leadership.
Thank you. It's been so good to be with you.
The Holy Post podcast is a production of Phil Vischer Enterprises, that's Phil's company, and Sky Pilot Media, that's Sky's company. Production assistance by Julie Betcher. Editing by Jason Rugg. Help us create more thoughtful Christian media by supporting us at patreon.com/Holy Post. Also, be sure to leave a review on iTunes so more people can discover thoughtful Christian commentary plus ukulele and occasional butt news. Visit holypost.com for show notes, news stories, and more.